Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to attach the facing, this bias facing, to the neckline of our bodice. Okay, there's a couple things I want to do real quick. You may notice in between takes here I pulled all the basting out. Usually you can wait until everything's together to do that, but I just want to have that totally done. Okay, because it kind of gets in the way and it's harder to take out when everything's sewn together. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take these lingerie straps and pin them down to the inside of this, because I don't want them flipping up when I'm trying to sew on that facing and catch them in there and then have to take it off. So I'm just pinning these down in place out of the way, like so. Okay. Now this bodice here, it has a sweetheart neckline, so it comes to a V. You don't need to do this if your bodice is just going straight across. But for this facing, to be able to put a facing on this, I need to clip right down to the tip of that V, to it but not through it, separating it like that. Okay? Alright, so I have my bias facing all pressed and stay stitched. We're going to do this in 2 pieces, okay? Because I have a V-neck right here. That's the way I like to do it, okay? Again, if this was just going straight across, I would just sew this facing on all the way from one side to the other, okay, instead of doing it in 2 pieces like I'm about to. The first thing I want to do is measure off how much of this facing I need. I always like to keep a little bit extra, about 2 inches or so, going past the cut edge of center back here, so I'm doing that. And I'm just kind of walking this facing around the edge, and then there's my center front right there. And I'm going to leave myself about 1 inch past center front. So there's one side, and then I'll do the same thing here, give myself about 1 inch past that center front, walk it out, and we have plenty. Okay, there's no reason to cut that down more. Alright, so I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to apply this, apply the facing. What we're going to do is we're going to put right sides together, okay, lining up the cut edge of the facing with the cut edge of the neckline of the bodice, and we'll stitch this on at 1/2 inch. Alright, what our seam allowance is. And then we'll do the other side as well. Alright, so let's go ahead and do that. Alright, we're at the machine. Again, I have a little bit extra facing going past my center back. And I'm going to sew this on at 1/2 inch. If it helps, you can pin your facing on first. And remember, when we start sewing the facing, we want to start sewing it where we started stitching or stopped stitching before center back. So I'm going to mark that right there with the pin. Okay, so I'm not going to start stitching right at center back. I'm going to start where I stopped stitching the whole thing, or where I stay stitched the thing together. So it's right there. Again, that's about 1.5 inches to 2 inches from our center back. Alright, there. Alright, and go ahead and sew this on at 1/2 inch. Back tack beginning and end. Around the curve of the bust on the neckline. Slow down just a little bit there. Now I have this point right here. I'll try to put a pin in there. Right where that point is. I want to stop sewing right there. Maybe even a stitch before it, but right around there. Lock it there. Seems like it might be it. Let me just check. Looks like it might be it. Take one more stitch, make sure. And back tack. There we go. Okay, let's look and see. Oops. Might be one stitch too many there. I'm going to actually just clip one of my stitches. There we go, right there. Perfect. Okay. That's good. Now, okay, I'm going to stitch this facing on this side. So again, cut edges, leave yourself a little extra at center front, and we want to kind of move. All right, here's my center front right here. I want to move this other facing out of the way, and I want to stitch right where I left off, which is right there. I'm going to put a pin in just to hold this in place. Again, if your neckline was just straight across, you wouldn't have to do this kind of more hard part. You just go ahead and just start stitching. Looks like it'd probably be right there. We'll come back and check that after we stitch the whole thing on. And back tack it. Okay, remember we want to stop about 2 inches away from center back, so right about there. Again, that's so we can get our closure in. Right there. Cut our threads. Alright, let's see how we did here in the front. I think we can go a little bit further there. Just gonna stitch it from this side where I can see a little bit better now that I'm not lining up the facing so much anymore. I'll do it from this lining side. I can see exactly where we need to stitch to. And make sure the other side is pulled out of the way. There we go, that looks good. Alright, let's go back to the cutting table for a minute. Alright, so there we go. We're all stitched up. Alright, facing's on. Now what we need to do, again, like at the bottom, we have these curves. We need to clip through those curves so that this falls in place correctly. Alright, so about every ½ inch or so, I'm going to clip right down to my stitching line, but not through it. Okay, so that's been clipped. Now what we're going to do is just like on the bottom, we're going to understitch. Okay, so we're going to pull this facing up towards all the seam allowances, and we're going to stitch about a 1/16 of an inch away from that seam we just created by stitching the facing to the bodice. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, if I stop stitching here, I'm going to start my understitching about 3/4 to an inch away from there. Again, this will just make it easier from the closure. You want all your seam allowance going towards your facing, and you want to pull that facing and the bodice in 2 opposite directions so you get a nice clean tight seam there. And you want to stitch about a 1/16 of an inch away from the edge of the seam that we just sewed. curve, it gets really tight, and you really have to pull that facing and the bodice in two opposite directions. Go. One side. And now we'll do the other side. Okay, and so I stop sewing, so I'll stop sewing right before that. There we go. Alright, so let's go back to the cutting table.